I wasn't looking for a new beginning. I wasn't even looking for a job. But when you're running from your own past, you take what life throws at you. The tires of my Jeep crunched over gravel as I turned onto Willow Creek Road. The map said it was only 2 miles from town, but as the trees closed in and the air grew colder, it felt like I was driving into another world entirely. The house emerged from the fog like something out of an old photograph, a sprawling wooden cabin too big for any one family sitting silent in a clearing. The shutters were drawn, and a faint light glowed in one upstairs window. This must be it, I whispered to myself. My stomach knotted. When I killed the engine, the silence swallowed me. No wind, no birds, just the faint smell of pine sap and wood smoke, hanging heavy in the air. I stepped out, tugging my coat tighter. The November chill here in Montana was sharper than the Texas winters I'd grown up with. The door opened before I could knock. A man stood there. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the posture of someone used to giving orders and being obeyed. His hair was dark, streaked with gray at the temples, and his eyes, they were a stormy blue, scanning me like a threat assessment. "You're Grace Miller." His voice was low and measured, like he rationed every word. "Yes, sir." I tried to sound steady, though my fingers twitched on the strap of my bag. "We spoke on the phone yesterday." He nodded once as if confirming I existed. "You're early." Roads were clear. A long pause stretched between us. He didn't step aside. I got the sense he wasn't used to strangers crossing his threshold. Finally he moved. "Come in." The air inside smelled of cedar and coffee, but beneath it was something colder, sterile almost. The furniture was expensive, but impersonal, like a model home, not a place where 2 little girls lived. "Dr. Carter," he said, extending a hand out of sheer formality. "Ethan Carter." His grip was firm, warm. "Grace Miller," I replied. We stood there awkwardly. Somewhere above us, a faint thump echoed a chair being knocked over. Maybe. He noticed my glance upward. "Sophie and Isla," he said flatly. 5 years old. Twins. I smiled. I've worked with twins before. Not like these. There was no warmth in his voice. No humor. Just a statement of fact. "Dinner's at 6. You can settle in for now. Rooms down the hall to the right." As he turned to leave, I heard it. A wail. It started soft, but built fast, splitting the air. Then another voice joined it, 2 cries rising in unison from the 2nd floor. Ethan froze. Just for a second. His shoulders tightened like a soldier bracing for impact. "They don't sleep much," he muttered. He disappeared up the stairs, his boots thudding on the wood. I stood there gripping my bag, staring at the ceiling as the crying grew louder. This wasn't what I'd expected. I'd come here thinking it was just a job, a few hours of childcare, a paycheck, nothing more. But hearing those cries, something in me cracked. It wasn't pity. It wasn't obligation. It was a memory of my own, long buried but still raw. I set my bag down slowly. Maybe this job wasn't going to be simple after all. I thought the first night would be quiet. I thought after meeting Dr. Carter and seeing how controlled and meticulous he seemed, there would be a sense of order in this house, no matter how cold it felt. But I was wrong. It was only a little after 7 when I heard the sharp sound of a plate shattering, then a muffled thud. I froze at the edge of the guest room, clutching the hem of my sweater. From upstairs came raised voices, not words. I could make out clearly, just a man's low rumble, followed by the piercing cry of a child. Then another cry joined in. The twins, Sophie and Isla. Their voices intertwined in a heartbreaking duet that made my chest tighten. I hesitated, one hand still on my half-unpacked bag. Maybe this wasn't for me. Maybe the last 3 nannies were right to leave. I had seen the resignation in Ethan's eyes earlier, the way he looked at me like I was already halfway out the door. He probably expected me to run like the others, and part of me wanted to. It would have been easy to zip my bag shut, get back in the Jeep and drive away from this place, where even the air seemed too heavy to breathe. I didn't owe these people anything. It was just a job. I told myself that twice, maybe 3 times, as I paced the small room, listening to the crying grow louder. Then a sound cut through the chaos, a faint, trembling voice. "Mommy." I stopped cold. It wasn't directed at me, of course, but the way it was said, it wasn't defiant or angry. It was fragile. A child reaching into the darkness for someone who wasn't there. I felt the sting behind my eyes before I could blink it away. For a moment, I wasn't in Montana anymore. I was 9 years old, sitting at the top of the stairs, in my grandmother's house, clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit, listening to my parents argue in the kitchen below. The crash of dishes. My mother's voice cracking. My father's boots stomping out the door. And then silence. Silence that never really left. I shook my head, forcing the memory back down where it belonged. This wasn't about me. These weren't my ghosts. But when I reached for my bag again, my fingers wouldn't close around the zipper. Instead, they curled against my palm, and I found myself walking not out the door, but down the hall, toward the staircase. The cries were still going raw and jagged, echoing off the wooden walls. Ethan's voice was low but strained, trying to calm them. "Enough. Please, Sophie. Isla, you have to sleep. You need rest." The sound of another object clattering to the floor, his sigh heavy and defeated. "I can't do this tonight. I can't." I hovered at the bottom of the stairs, every instinct telling me not to interfere. This wasn't my place. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But then there it was again, the small, broken voice. "Mommy, don't go." I didn't remember making the choice. My feet moved before my mind caught up, carrying me up the stairs, one hand trailing along the smooth wooden banister. At the top, a dim nightlight glowed from under a cracked door. That's where the sound was coming from. I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I wasn't their mother. I wasn't even sure I was the right person to help. But in that moment, standing outside that room, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't walk away. The door creaked softly as I pushed it open. The room smelled faintly of lavender, the kind of scent meant to soothe restless children, but it wasn't working. Sophie and Idla sat huddled on the bed, their small faces blotchy and wet with tears. Sophie clutched a stuffed bear so tight, her knuckles were white, and Isla's thumb was jammed in her mouth, her eyes wide and glistening like 2 terrified little animals caught in a storm. They stared at me, as if I were the enemy. "It's okay," I said gently, stepping into the dim glow of the nightlight. "I'm Grace. I'm here to help." Sophie shook her head so hard her tangled hair whipped across her face. "No, go away," Isla echoed, her twin voice breaking. "We want Mommy." My heart clenched. Their mother wasn't coming back. I could see it in the way Ethan's eyes had darkened when he spoke her name earlier. But I didn't say that. You don't rip away the last thread of comfort from a child who's already lost too much. I took another cautious step forward, but they shrank back, clutching each other like they were bracing for impact. Then I heard him behind me. "She won't get through to them." Ethan's voice was cold, flat. I turned slightly. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed over his broad chest, his expression carved from stone. "They don't listen," he said. "They scream until they pass out. It's been this way for months." There was no anger in his tone, only exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones and never really leaves. "Go get some sleep," I told him softly. You look like you haven't had any in weeks." His brow furrowed as if surprised I dared say it. "You won't last the night," he muttered. None of them did. Maybe I admitted, but I'd like to try. For a moment neither of us moved. Then he pushed off the door frame with a heavy sigh and disappeared down the hall, his footsteps fading like a retreating tide. I turned back to the twins. They were still staring at me, suspicious, trembling. "I know you don't want me here," I said gently. "And that's okay. I'm not here to take your mommy's place." Sophie hiccuped, her tiny shoulders quaking. Isla buried her face in the bear's matted fur. I lowered myself slowly onto the floor, crossing my legs. "You don't have to talk to me. You don't even have to look at me. I'm just going to sit here, and when you're ready, you can tell me about her." They didn't answer, but they didn't scream either. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small ukulele, its wood worn smooth from years of use. I hadn't played it in a long time, not since I left Texas, and everything I'd known behind. But my fingers remembered. "I'm going to sing a little, okay?" I said softly. No response. So I began. It was an old folk song my grandmother used to hum on hot summer nights when the cicadas droned outside her screen porch. Simple, steady, warm like a heartbeat. At first, Sophie and Isla kept their eyes fixed on me like startled fawns. But as the melody drifted through the room, I saw Isla's thumb slip from her mouth. Sophie loosened her grip on the bear just slightly. Their breathing slowed. The sobs came less frequently, then stopped altogether. I kept playing my voice low and steady, not daring to break the fragile calm that had settled over them. When I glanced at the door, Ethan was there again. He wasn't leaning this time. He stood perfectly still, his face unreadable in the half-light. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. I just kept singing. When the last note faded into the quiet, I sat perfectly still, afraid to even breathe. Sophie had curled against Isla, her tiny hand resting on her sister's arm. Their eyes were closed now, lashes still wet, but no longer trembling. For the first time that night, there was no crying, only the soft, rhythmic sound of their breathing. I set the ukulele down on the carpet, careful not to make a sound. "You have a way with them." His voice made me jump. Ethan was still in the doorway. He hadn't moved an inch, but something about him seemed different. His arms weren't crossed anymore. His shoulders had lost that rigid military tension. "I wasn't sure it would work," I whispered back. "Why did you even try?" His tone wasn't cold this time, just curious. I glanced at the twins before answering, because no child cries like that, unless their heart is carrying something too heavy for them. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought I'd said the wrong thing. "I've hired professionals," he said finally. "Therapists, sleep consultants, even a pediatrician who insisted on sedatives. None of them could do this." "This isn't about professionalism," I murmured. "It's about presence." He tilted his head slightly. "Presence. Being here, not just physically. Children feel it when someone's only halfway with them. They know when they're a task to manage, instead of a soul to hold." The words surprised even me. I hadn't spoken like this in a long time. Not since. I looked down at my hands, the faint tremor in my fingers, betraying memories I hadn't invited in years. Ethan noticed. His eyes narrowed not in suspicion, but in that sharp way people look when they're seeing more than you want them to. "You've done this before." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I admitted. "You're not just a babysitter." "I was a child counselor," I said quietly. "A long time ago. What happened?" His voice softened just enough to make the question feel less like an interrogation and more like an invitation. I hesitated. The room felt too small, too warm. I wasn't ready to tell him the whole story, how I'd lost a child in my care, how the guilt had eaten me alive, until I walked away from everything. Life happened, I said simply, and I stopped believing I could help anyone. He didn't press, and for that I was grateful. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. I don't know what I'm doing, Grace. With them. With any of this. It was the first honest thing I'd heard from him. They don't need you to know, I replied softly. They just need you to stay. He glanced at the twins, and I saw the faintest crack in the ice around him. Thank you, he said, after a long pause. You don't have to thank me, I murmured. This isn't about me. It is now, he said almost too quietly for me to hear. I gathered my bag and stood careful not to disturb the girls. As I moved past him into the hall, I caught a faint scent of cedar and clean linen on his shirt. You're different, he said suddenly. I turned, startled. What do you mean, from the others? You didn't try to fix them. You just stayed. I guess I know what it feels like to need someone to stay, I said before I could stop myself. Our eyes met in the dim light. His were still guarded, but no longer frozen. Good night, Dr. Carter. Ethan, he corrected softly. Good night, Ethan. As I walked back to my room, I realized my own heart felt strangely lighter. Maybe theirs wasn't the only healing that needed to happen in this house. The next morning, I woke up to a house so quiet. It felt unnatural. For a moment, I wondered if last night had just been some fragile dream. 2 children finally sleeping their father, finally letting someone else step in. But when I stepped into the kitchen, I saw the signs. 2 little bowls with soggy cereal sat on the counter. A pair of small pink socks had been abandoned on the tile floor. And somewhere down the hall, I heard soft giggles. I followed the sound to the living room. Sophie and Isla were sitting cross-legged on the hardwood floor, a box of crayons spilled open between them. The morning sun streamed through the blinds, catching in their messy hair, and making them look like something out of a painting. Hi, girls, I said gently. They looked up in unison. Isla gave a tentative smile, while Sophie, ever the cautious twin, studied me, like she wasn't sure if I'd passed her unspoken test yet. What are you making? I asked, kneeling beside them. Mommy used to draw with us, Isla whispered. Her voice wobbled, but she didn't cry. I nodded. Would it be okay if I drew with you now? Sophie hesitated, then nudged a crayon toward me. You can use purple. Purple's my favorite, I said, with a small smile, though it wasn't true. For the next hour we sat there sketching crooked houses, stick-figure animals, and wobbly suns with too many rays. At one point, Isla started humming a tune under her breath. Sophie joined in, and before I knew it, they were both laughing. Not just polite giggles, but full-bodied, squeaky belly laughs that tumbled out like bubbles escaping a bottle. It was infectious. I laughed too. The sound felt strange in this house, too bright, too alive for the walls that had grown used to whispers and tears. That's when I noticed him. Ethan stood in the doorway, still in his pressed dress shirt and slacks from the hospital. His tie was loose sleeves, rolled to his elbows, a coffee mug forgotten in his hand. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His eyes swept over the crayons littering the floor, the paper scraps scattered across the rug, the faint smudges of marker on Isla's cheek. His jaw tightened. This is a mess, he said finally, voice low. Sophie froze mid-giggle. Isla's smile slipped away. I stood slowly. It's a creative mess. Ethan's eyes met mine, and for a second I saw a flickered disapproval. Yes, but also confusion. They've been quiet for months, he said. Now they're loud, and I don't know if that's... Good or bad? It's good, I replied. They're children, Ethan. They're supposed to be loud. They're supposed to laugh and play and make a mess. He didn't answer right away. Sophie glanced between us nervously, as if trying to gauge whether her laughter had been a mistake. Daddy, she said softly. Ethan blinked, startled. His eyes softened a fraction. Yes, sweetheart. Look. She held up her drawing a clumsy crayon sketch of 3 figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. 2 little girls with brown hair, and a tall man with blue eyes. He stepped closer, taking the paper from her tiny fingers. For a moment he didn't speak. His thumb brushed over the stick figure faces. It's very nice, he said finally, though his voice cracked ever so slightly. Sophie beamed. Isla grinned, and just like that the tension in the room dissolved. I should have known the quiet wouldn't last. Later that afternoon, I found Ethan in the kitchen, his sleeves still rolled tie, now draped over the back of a chair. He stood at the sink, scrubbing at a mug like it had personally offended him. You let them cover the living room walls in paper, he said without turning around. I froze. They were drawing, I answered carefully. They were making chaos. His voice was low but sharp like a blade drawn halfway from its sheath. I crossed my arms. Children aren't meant to live in a museum. That got his attention. He turned, then blue eyes, narrowed posture, stiff. This isn't about museums. It's about discipline, structure. Without that, they'll fall apart. They're already falling apart, Ethan, I said softly. His jaw clenched. They've lost their mother, I continued. They've lost their routines. And the only parent they have left spends more time at the hospital than he does here. That's not fair. His tone deepened warning. Isn't it? I asked, refusing to look away. You think keeping this house spotless and keeping them quiet means you're holding it all together. But they don't need a soldier standing guard over their grief. They need their father. The words hung heavy in the air. He stepped closer, and for a moment I wondered if I'd pushed too far. You think I don't know that, he said, voice tight. You think I don't hear them crying when I'm here, and when I'm not. You think I don't replay every decision I've made since my wife died. His hands gripped the edge of the counter so hard, I thought the wood might splinter. I'm doing the best I can, he said through gritted teeth. I took a deep breath. I believe you. But Ethan, your best doesn't have to mean being perfect. It means being present, even when it's messy, even when you feel like you're failing. His gaze softened, but only slightly. You talk like you know what this feels like, he murmured. I do, I admitted. I could see the question in his eyes, but he didn't ask it. Instead, he let out a long breath and ran a hand through his hair, leaving it mussed for the first time since I'd met him. You're not afraid to tell me what you think, he said quietly. Do you want me to be a flicker of something? Not anger? Not quite amusement crossed his face. No. We stood there in silence, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space between us. Finally, he straightened his voice, returning to its usual calm. I'll try to be here, more, for them. And I'll do my best to make sure this house doesn't turn into a circus, I said, allowing the faintest smile. Deal, he replied, though it sounded more like a truce than an agreement. As he turned to leave, Sophie's laughter drifted in from the hallway. Ethan paused, his hand on the doorframe, listening. For the first time, I saw the faintest curve of a smile on his lips, small and fleeting, but real. The house was finally quiet. For once, there were no soft cries behind closed doors, no sound of restless little feet padding down the hallway. The twins had fallen asleep after a long day of play and laughter, something that still felt rare enough to make my chest ache, with a strange mix of hope and fear. I found him on the back porch. Ethan sat alone in the dark, a mug cradled in his hands. The air smelled faintly of pine and rain-soaked earth. The Montana night wrapped around us in a cold, heavy silence, broken only by the occasional chirp of crickets. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked softly. He didn't startle. He didn't even look at me at first. "Never do," he said. I stepped out, the wooden boards creaking under my feet. In my hands was a second mug of tea, steam curling into the cold air. Without asking, I set it down on the railing near him. He glanced at it, then at me, his eyes catching the faint porch light. There was no sharpness in them tonight, just a bone-deep exhaustion. "Thank you," he murmured. We sat in silence for a long while. I didn't push him to talk. Some wounds don't respond well to questions. "She died while I was overseas," he said finally. His voice was quiet, but the weight of his words was louder than any shout. I turned to him slowly. "My wife, Claire," he continued. "I was deployed in the Middle East. I'd spent years preparing for every possible threat out there. IEDs, ambushes, even the damn sandstorms that could bury a convoy in minutes. But I never prepared for the phone call that would rip my life apart." I held my breath. She was driving to pick up the girls from preschool. A semi ran a red light. Instant. They told me she probably didn't feel a thing. His hands gripped the mug tighter, knuckles pale in the dim light. I didn't even get to say goodbye. I didn't get to hold her hand to tell her. His voice broke then. He didn't finish the sentence. The air between us felt thick, as though even the night itself was holding its breath. "I thought I could handle it," he said after a moment. "I'm trained to compartmentalize, to push through, to keep moving. But when I came home, everything was different. The house was different. The girls didn't sleep, and neither did I." I swallowed hard. "You've been carrying all of it alone," I said softly. "What choice did I have?" "You didn't have to do it alone," I whispered. His eyes lifted to mine then, and for the first time I saw past the mask of control and strength he wore like armor. There was rawness there, vulnerability. "You remind me of her sometimes," he said quietly. "The way you talk to them, the way you just stay calm, no matter how bad it gets." I blinked back the sudden sting in my eyes. "I'm not her Ethan. I know," he said, "but maybe that's why I keep noticing." We sat there for a long time, two broken people in the dark, the steam from our mugs curling into the cold air, like fragile threads, trying to weave something whole again. The steam from my tea had long since faded into the cold night air, but I still held the mug in my hands, more for comfort than warmth. Ethan hadn't spoken again after sharing about Claire, and I hadn't pressed. Some griefs don't need answers. They just need space. But his story had unlocked something in me, a door I'd been holding shut for far too long. "I wasn't planning to come here," I said softly. My voice surprised even me in the stillness. Ethan's head turned slightly, his blue eyes catching the faint porch light. He didn't speak, just waited. I was engaged once I continued staring down at the dark liquid in my cup. It was a safe choice. He was kind, successful. My family adored him, but somewhere deep down, I think I knew I didn't. I took a breath, feeling the old weight press against my ribs. 2 months before the wedding, I found out he wasn't the man I thought he was. Controlling, possessive. The kind of person who smiles in public, but keeps score in private. I traced a finger along the rim of the mug. When I ended it, he didn't take it well. He showed up at my job, my apartment. For weeks, I felt like prey being stalked. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically," I said, but sometimes words cut deeper than fists. A long silence stretched between us. I wasn't sure why I'd told him. I hadn't spoken those words out loud in years. Maybe it was the night, or the way he'd looked at me earlier, not with judgment or pity, but something steadier. I thought if I moved far enough, I could leave it all behind, I murmured. But memories don't care about distance. Ethan shifted, setting his mug down on the railing. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but firm. I don't know where he is now, Grace, and I don't care. But hear me when I say this. I will not let anyone hurt you. Not while you're under my roof. The words sank into me like a warm blanket. Why would you say that? I asked softly. Because you've been carrying that fear alone too long, he said. And because you're here now. With us. The with us startled me more than I expected. We fell into silence again, but it felt different this time. Not heavy, not tense. Comfortable. The kind of silence that only happens when two people have seen enough darkness to appreciate the calm. Do you miss her? I asked gently. Every day, he admitted without hesitation. But it's different now. At first, I couldn't say her name without breaking. Now, I can remember her and still move forward. I nodded slowly. That's a gift. To hold on and let go at the same time. You'll get there too, he said. One day. The porch light flickered, casting us briefly in shadow. I glanced at him, noticing how the hard lines of his face had softened in the quiet. I wasn't sure when his hand brushed mine just lightly, like a question. I didn't pull away. It started with a single blanket and a string of fairy lights. Camping Isla tilted her head, clutching her stuffed bunny, as I spread the blanket across the floor. Indoor camping, I explained with a grin. No bugs, no cold. Just us some stories, and maybe a few marshmallows if we're lucky. Sophie watched me warily at first, but when I draped the lights over 2 chairs to make a tiny glowing tent, her lips curved into the faintest smile. Can we bring Bear? She asked, holding up her tattered teddy. Of course. Bear's the guest of honor. By the time we were settled inside our little fort, the twins had pulled in every pillow they could carry and lined them up like a nest. I sat cross-legged between them, the ukulele resting in my lap. Do you want a story first? Or a song? I asked softly. Story, Isla said. Song, Sophie countered. I laughed. How about both? Their heads nodded in unison, and for the first time since I'd met them, I saw no trace of fear in their eyes, just the unguarded wonder of 2 little girls who for one night could pretend the world was gentle again. I opened a worn copy of Goodnight Moon and began to read, my voice low, and even like my grandmother's had been on nights when I was too restless to sleep. As the words flowed, Isla's eyelids grew heavy. Sophie fought to stay awake, blinking hard, but by the time I strummed the first notes of a lullaby, her head had already tipped onto my shoulder. I sang softly, rocking them with the rhythm of my voice. They didn't stir. Not when the song ended. Not when I carefully shifted to tuck the blanket higher around their small shoulders. For the first time since I arrived at this house, Sophie and Isla slept soundly. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That's when I saw him. Ethan stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame. The dim light from the hall cast his face in shadow, but even from here, I could see the change. Gone was the rigid posture, the watchful tension I'd grown used to. His shoulders sagged, not in defeat this time, but in relief. He didn't speak. I pressed a finger to my lips and smiled. He nodded slowly, his eyes softening as they flicked from the twins to me. For a long moment, he just watched. And in the quiet, I realized something I hadn't before. It wasn't only the girls who needed peace. So did he. The twins didn't stir as we stepped out of their room. Their soft breaths came in perfect rhythm, their faces peaceful in a way I hadn't seen since the day I arrived. I pulled the door shut gently, careful not to let the latch click too loud. When I turned, Ethan was still standing there in the dim hallway light. His gaze stayed fixed on the door for a long moment, as though he was afraid even his presence might wake them. "They're asleep," I whispered. I can see that he said softly. I didn't think I'd ever see it again. There was no trace of the guarded man from my first day here. His voice carried no command, no authority, just quiet awe and something else I couldn't name. I gestured toward the stairs. "Do you want to sit a while? I'll make tea." He hesitated, then nodded. In the kitchen, the kettle whistled gently as I set 2 mugs on the table. The soft clink of ceramic seemed louder than usual in the stillness of the house. We carried our tea to the living room, settling into the chairs near the fireplace. The flames had burned low, casting a faint orange glow that made the space feel warmer than it had in weeks. For a while, we didn't talk. The quiet between us didn't feel heavy this time. It felt safe. "You're good with them," he said finally. "Better than anyone I've ever seen." "They're easy to love," I replied. They weren't easy before he admitted. Not after Claire. They shut down, and I didn't know how to bring them back. "You're too hard on yourself." He gave a humorless laugh. "That's what Claire used to say." "She sounds like she was kind," I said gently. "She was," he murmured. "Kind, stubborn, patient. Everything I wasn't." "You're patient enough," I said. He shook his head slightly. "No. You're the patient one, Grace. You walked into this house and didn't flinch. You didn't run when things got hard. You stayed. I didn't realize how much we needed that." His words hit harder than I expected. "I wasn't sure I'd stay at first," I admitted. It scared me seeing how much hurt was in this house. But then I saw how much love was here too, buried under all the pain. Ethan turned his head, his eyes meeting mine across the faint glow of the fire. "You're not an outsider anymore," he said quietly. I felt it then, the subtle shift in the air, like the moment before a leaf falls from its branch. His hand brushed against mine on the armrest. Not a grab, not a demand, just a question. I didn't pull away. For the first time in a long while, I felt the walls around my own heart loosen brick by cautious brick. The phone vibrated on the counter, its shrill buzz cutting through the calm like a blade. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. My stomach knotted. I hesitated for a moment, then swiped to answer, pressing the phone to my ear. Grace. A low voice drawled on the other end. The sound of it turned my blood cold. It had been months since I'd heard his voice, but somehow it felt like no time at all. "Evan." I whispered, my hand tightening around the phone. "You didn't think you could just disappear, did you?" He said, his tone mockingly soft. "You can't run forever. I told you it's over." I hissed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't care what you said. You owe me, Grace. And I always collect my debts." The sound of his laugh sent a shiver down my spine. "Don't call me again," I snapped, hitting the end button with trembling fingers. I didn't realize I was shaking until I set the phone down on the counter and gripped the edge of it to steady myself. "You're pale," came a low voice behind me. I spun around. Nathan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his eyes sharp and unblinking. "How long have you been standing there?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "Long enough," he said. He took a step closer. "Who was that?" "No one," I said too quickly. His gaze hardened. It didn't sound like no one. "It's not your business," I snapped, hating how brittle my voice sounded. He didn't flinch. "Grace, if someone's threatening you, I need to know. You're not here alone anymore." "I can handle it," I said. "Like you handled it before." He asked, his tone calm but cutting. I froze. "I don't know what you heard, but this is my problem," I said, forcing my voice steady. Not yours. This is my house, he said evenly. You live under my roof. My daughters love you. If someone's coming after you, it becomes my problem too. The warmth in his voice from last night was gone now. He sounded like the officer he used to be controlled commanding. And for some reason, that made the knot in my chest tighten even more. I don't need saving, I said, my voice rising. His eyes didn't leave mine. Maybe not. But I'm not going to stand by while someone tries to hurt you. The words caught me off guard. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt charged, like the moments before a summer storm breaks. You don't understand, I whispered finally. Then explain it to me, he said softly. But I couldn't. Not yet. So instead I turned and walked away, leaving my phone and the faint smell of coffee lingering in the kitchen. I didn't get far before I heard his footsteps behind me. Steady. Certain. Grace, wait. I stopped halfway up the stairs but didn't turn. Don't do this, he said. His voice was softer now, but it carried the same weight as before. Do what I asked, my hands gripping the railing. Push me out. I drew in a shaky breath. This isn't your fight, Nathan. It's mine. I can't let you get pulled into my mess. I felt him close the space between us. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, just far enough that I couldn't feel his warmth, but close enough that his presence pressed in all the same. You think I can stand by and do nothing? His voice was low, almost dangerous. I turned then. And what exactly do you plan to do? You don't even know the man he is. Evan doesn't play by rules. He doesn't stop until he gets what he wants. His jaw tightened. And you think I scare that easily? That's not the point, I said, my voice breaking. If you get involved, it only makes things worse. He'll use it against you, against the girls. For a moment, silence hung between us, thick and heavy. Then he stepped closer, his boots creaking against the hardwood. His hand brushed the railing. Grace, he said softly, but there was no mistaking the steel in his tone. You're not just some employee under this roof. You're not a passing stranger who will leave when the contract ends. You're already part of this family. My breath hitched. And you're mine now. He said the words falling out low and unflinching. Do you understand mine to protect? Mine to keep safe? I froze. The air shifted heavier, warmer, pulling me in and warning me away all at once. You can't say that, I whispered. But I just did, he replied. I looked at him, then really looked and saw a man standing on the edge of something neither of us could undo. This isn't just about protection anymore, I murmured. No, he said quietly. It's not. His hand reached for mine, not forceful, not demanding, just there waiting. I didn't take it, but I didn't move away either, because deep down, I knew he was right. Somewhere between bedtime stories and whispered confessions in the dark, the lines we'd drawn had blurred, and I wasn't sure I wanted them back. The cabin was smaller than I expected. Tucked deep in the pines, it felt like the kind of place built to hold in warmth and keep out the rest of the world. A single plume of smoke rose from the stone chimney as we pulled up the gravel path. Nathan cut the engine and turned to me. It's remote enough. He won't find us here. I nodded, clutching my bag tighter. The twins were asleep in the back seat, their heads tipped together, cheeks rosy from the cold. We'll wake them gently, I whispered. Nathan gave a small smile, one of those rare ones that seemed to belong to a man no one else ever saw. Or we carry them. And so we did. Isla stirred only slightly as I cradled her against my chest. Sophie's tiny hand clung to Nathan's shirt, even in sleep, like she already knew he was her anchor in this drifting world. Inside the cabin smelled faintly of cedar and wood smoke, The floor creaked under our steps, and the windows were fogged from the warmth inside. We laid the girls down on the old couch, covering them with a thick quilt. "They're safe here," Nathan said almost to himself. "I know," I murmured. He turned to me, then his eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "You too," he added quietly. "You're safe here." Something in my chest loosened, though I didn't let myself say anything. The hours that followed felt strangely like life. We unpacked the few groceries we'd grabbed along the way. I found a cast-iron skillet and started making scrambled eggs, while Nathan built a fire. The girls woke mid-morning, rubbing their eyes in confusion, before breaking into sleepy grins at the sight of the crackling hearth. "Are we camping again?" Isla asked. "Something like that," I said, tousling her hair. By afternoon, the tension that had clung to all of us began to dissolve. The twins played on the rug with their stuffed animals, while Nathan and I sipped coffee at the kitchen table. "They've changed," he said quietly, watching them. "You've changed them." "They needed permission to be children again," I replied. "And maybe you needed permission to be their father again." He looked at me sharply, but not unkindly. "And you, who gave you permission to care this much?" I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it again. Because I didn't know when it had happened, when this job had stopped being a job, when this house, these children, and this man had crept under my skin. Maybe no one did, I admitted softly. Maybe I just stopped fighting it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. In the corner, Sophie's laughter rang out like wind chimes, clear and bright, and for the first time in years, I realized the sound didn't make me ache anymore. It made me hope. That night, the cabin felt warmer than it had any right to in the middle of a Montana winter. The fire crackled low, its glow flickering across the wooden beams. Sophie and Isla were curled up on either side of me, their heads resting on my lap, their soft breaths slow and steady. Nathan sat across from us, his long frame folded into the armchair, one hand cradling a mug, the other absent-mindedly rubbing his thumb over his knee. "You're good with them," he said quietly, his voice barely above the sound of the fire. I smiled faintly, brushing a stray lock of hair from Sophie's forehead. "They make it easy." He gave a small shake of his head. "No, it wasn't easy before. I've tried, and I couldn't reach them. But you." He stopped himself, exhaling slowly. Before I could respond, a sleepy voice interrupted. "Mommy." My breath caught. It came from Isla. Her eyes were still half closed, her thumb tucked into her mouth. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked softly, my heart thudding in my chest. "Will you sing again?" I blinked, trying to process the word she'd used. Mommy. Not Ellie. Not Miss Grace. Mommy. I glanced up, unsure what to say, only to find Nathan staring at me. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between surprise and something deeper, something that made my stomach flutter. Sophie stirred on my other side. "Mommy, too," she murmured, shifting closer to me. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. "Of course," I whispered, my voice tight. "I'll sing." I hummed the same lullaby I'd sung the night before, my fingers stroking their hair until they drifted back into sleep. When I looked up again, Nathan had set his mug aside and was leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees. "I wasn't expecting that," he said softly. "Neither was I admitted. "They already see you as theirs," he murmured. "Maybe it's time I admit. I do too." My breath caught again, but this time for a different reason. He stood then slowly, like a man weighing every step. And then to my complete shock, he lowered himself onto one knee in front of me. "I'm not perfect," he said, his voice steady, but roughened with emotion. God knows I'm stubborn and broken in ways I can't even name. But I know this. I don't want to spend another day pretending you're just passing through our lives. Nathan. I can't promise you ease, Grace. I can't promise no storms, but I can promise I'll stay even when it's hard. I'll fight for you. For them, for us. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. No diamond, no flourish. Just a plain ring that seemed to shine brighter than anything I'd ever seen. What do you say? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Will you marry me? For a moment, all I could do was stare. The man I'd once thought of as cold and unreachable now looked up at me with a quiet vulnerability that left me breathless. Yes, I heard myself say the words spilling out before I could think. Yes, Nathan. His shoulders sagged in relief, and the smile that broke across his face nearly undid me. When he slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt something shift deep inside me. I wasn't running anymore. I'd found my place. The meadow stretched out before me golden in the late afternoon sun. Wildflowers swayed gently in the breeze, and beyond them the mountains stood like silent witnesses. I tightened my grip on Nathan's hand. Ready? He asked softly, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. I smiled through the lump in my throat. I've been ready longer than I realized. The soft giggles of Isla and Sophie pulled my attention. They danced ahead of us in matching white dresses, tossing handfuls of petals into the air. Slower girls, Nathan called with a laugh. Save some flowers for the rest of the path. They turned grinning, their cheeks pink with excitement. Yes, Daddy. Isla chirped. Yes, Mommy. Sophie added, her voice bright as the sky above. That one word, Mommy, still made my chest ache in the best possible way. As we walked, my fingers brushed the smooth fabric of my dress. Simple ivory, no lace or frills. It wasn't the wedding I had imagined years ago in another life, but it was everything I didn't know I needed. A year ago, I arrived at Nathan's ranch expecting nothing more than a job and a temporary place to hide. I never imagined I'd find a family. Back then, Nathan was all sharp edges and closed doors. The girls were shadows of themselves, restless and afraid. And I was still running from my past, too scared to believe I deserved more. But somehow, between bedtime stories, ukulele songs, and long nights by the fire, we found our way here. To this meadow. To this moment. To each other. Nathan gave my hand a gentle squeeze. Penny, for your thoughts. I was just thinking how strange it feels, I murmured. What does that I don't feel like I'm running anymore? He stopped walking and turned to face me fully. His hand cupped my cheek, his thumb brushing lightly against my skin. That's because you're home now, Grace, he said softly. We both are. Behind us, Sophie's voice floated on the breeze. Hurry up. The flowers are almost gone. Nathan chuckled. We'd better not keep our flower girls waiting. The cabin was quiet now, after the small wedding celebration, after the laughter and the gentle music, after Sophie and Isla had finally collapsed into sleep upstairs. The world seemed to exhale with us. I stood by the window, the hem of my simple ivory dress, brushing against the floorboards, and watched as the last streaks of orange faded from the Montana sky. The meadow outside looked almost silver in the moonlight. The wildflowers that the girls had tossed earlier now lay scattered like stars on the grass. Nathan came up behind me, his footsteps soft on the worn wooden floor. They're out like lights, he said with a quiet smile. Didn't even make it through their bedtime story. I turned to him, and in that moment I felt a swell of emotion so strong it almost brought me to my knees. I keep thinking about the first night I arrived, I murmured. How scared I was. Of this place. Of you. Of myself. He stepped closer, his hand finding mine. And now he asked. I looked up into his eyes, the same eyes that had once been so guarded, so cold. Now they were steady and warm like the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Now I feel like I can finally breathe, I whispered. Like I'm not running anymore. Nathan squeezed my hand gently. You're not, he said. You're here. With us. And you're not going anywhere. I thought about the woman I had been back then, tired, restless, carrying a weight I didn't know how to put down. I remembered the sound of the twins crying in the dark, the way Nathan stood at a distance, a man grieving in silence, and how I had almost turned around and left that very first night. And yet, here we were. They called me Mommy today, I said softly, my voice catching. It felt like the final piece sliding into place. Nathan smiled, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. They see you for what you are, he said. Their mother, my wife, the heart of this family. We stood there for a moment wrapped in silence. Not the heavy silence of strangers, but the easy quiet of people who have weathered storms together and found peace on the other side. When we finally climbed the stairs and slipped into bed, I listened to the faint sound of Sophie's and Isla's breathing down the hall. For so long this house had been restless at night, echoing with grief and unspoken fears. But not anymore. Nathan's arm came around me, pulling me close, and I let my head rest on his shoulder. I came to Montana to be a nanny, I whispered into the darkness. But now we sleep peacefully every night, in a real home, our home. Nathan pressed a kiss to my forehead. Yes, he murmured, ours. And as the wind whispered through the pines outside, I felt it deep in my bones for the first time in years. We were safe. We were whole. We were home.